Graham, how are you? Long time no see.
Hey, John. Yeah, doing good. Thanks. Doing good. Yeah, been a while.
Yeah. So today's kind of a big day because not only is it the 2-year anniversary of the Bitcoin law in El Salvador, but it's also the day, or rather, maybe some of it was done yesterday, but basically the documentary that we were both involved in, called Bitcoin Dare to Dream, a story from El Salvador, uh, came out today. And so it's been a long journey. We recorded it or filmed it, most of it in November of 2021. And since then, there's been filmings in other countries with different people, lots of editing, and then, a lot of effort on your side to basically get the type of distribution and eyeballs on this that you and I and many others think it's deserving of. And we'll break into a bit more about the motivation on why we, and particularly you, wanted to seek distribution in that way. But first, why don't we just get whatever kind of intro you're comfortable with or you want to give about yourself, and then we can crack into the film.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, I mean it's definitely a big day. It's like you say, 2 years on from the law itself, and so that in itself is a huge thing, and we'll get into that and talk about everything that's happened in the last 2 years. And like you say, I mean, it's probably been about 2 years. Well, a bit more than that, to be honest, in terms of kind of planning, and for the actual film itself. So I think we started talking about it back in July, August 21, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And planned it and then filmed it in November. So November 21. So yeah, it's been a long journey, and happy to be here to get into it with you. It's highly appropriate, I think.
I was thinking just before this what the genesis of the film was, and there was probably, from different perspectives, you're going to get a different story, but from my memory, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I think it was July 2021. And after the Bitcoin conference, I was traveling around a bit. I wound up going to El Salvador with a group of Bitcoiners. We were having lunch at Garten Hotel one day, like the really nice hotel in Zante. You came up from the beach all sweaty, just wanting a beer. You sat down at the table with us. We started chatting. And so that's how we got to know each other. And then on that same trip, I met Roman, Chimbora, and Jorge, which are, the two local guys that the film focuses on. And I was doing morning jungle runs with them. I met them at Hope House, and they do like these 6 a.m., runs through the jungle. And so that appealed to me, and I got to know them that way. And then we did a podcast together. And I think, it was just kind of ghetto. I put a mic in the middle of the table, and we chatted for 2 hours plus. And, we became friends over the course of the week or so I was there. And then the next thing I remember, Chimbera wanted to like go for dinner one night and talk about something. And long story short, he said, like, I can't remember where the rumblings of a documentary emerged from, but he was like, would you like to be involved? And I think he said that because, maybe the podcast we had touched on some points or went a little bit deeper than other ones that he had done. And therefore, he thought maybe that was appropriate framing, or kind of I understood, or not understood, but like I saw the breadth and depth of the story perhaps. And that's why, he thought maybe my involvement would be beneficial. And my response was like, well, I have nothing. I don't know anything about documentaries, never done one. Don't know how I could be of help, but, in principle, I'll help in any way I can. And that was it. And, I didn't think anything would come of it, because usually things don't on such, conversations. Yeah. And then next thing I remember, maybe a month or two later, I get a call from you, and, you say, I think after I left, you stayed for a few weeks on, or like later, and you had spoken more with Chimbera, and it actually become a thing, and you guys had kind of ironed out how you want to go about it, and it was actually going to move forward, and you were going to start filming in November. And And you were like, do you want to be involved? And I think I was still like, well, sure, but I don't really know in what capacity. And then we kind of talked about it. And then, a few weeks later, I was on a plane to El Salvador. So that's my recollection of how things got started. But what's yours from, what was the experience from your perspective?
Yeah, well, I mean, it was pretty much along those lines. But it's funny though, you should say, well, your response was, well, I don't know anything about documentaries. I've never been in one, never done any of that before. And well, that was exactly the same with me, So I even though I kind of proposed the idea to Chimbora, I'd never done one before in my life. But I mean, just sort of, going back, yeah, I when I arrived in, because I mean, it goes back to really the time of hearing the announcement in Miami, right? I wasn't in Miami. I know you were when Jack Mallers went on stage and then introduced President Bukele, and I was at home watching it. Well, I wasn't. I was actually at my old home, but it doesn't matter. But I was. And I just watched this announcement, and I was just like, wow, this is insane. What's going on? This is crazy. And it was such a a positive, a bolt out of the blue that was so positive in such a negative time, right? There was, we were still very much in the middle of this whole COVID craziness, and so it was just, wow, something to get excited about. And so I just heard that announcement. I was like, right, what's going on? I hadn't, just wasn't really on my radar. I'd heard there were, rumblings of something was going to happen, something big was going to be announced, but, I had no idea what. So yeah, when I saw that and saw Bukele and his speech, which I thought was really impactful, as Jack Mallers as well, but it was after that I was like, I gotta understand what's going on here, and probably I'm going to end up going to El Salvador, and so I started digging into it and going down a little bit of that rabbit hole, discovered the whole Bitcoin Beach thing. And I was just like, wow, sounds like a fascinating story. So if I could have done, I probably would have booked a flight that day. I was like, wow, I made the decision. I'm going to El Salvador, but I actually had some kind of health issues at the time, nothing too serious, but I had a problem in my shoulder. I couldn't hardly move my shoulder at the time, so I wasn't in a position to travel. But yeah, so I was going through a whole bunch of physio at the time, so that's why it was about, I guess, a month or two later that it happened. I can't remember when the Miami thing happened. Was that April, May?
Something like that.
Something like that.
Yeah.
So it was around July. Headed off to El Salvador, and I went there with no real objective, other than just I want to go and see what's happening. I also kind of wanted to get out of Europe anyway, and so I and at the back of my mind for quite some time I'd had this idea. We can go back and talk a little bit about my background and stuff, because it wasn't documentary making, and but at the back of my mind I'd had this idea for some time that I'd quite like to make a documentary film one day. And I guess just because watching some great documentaries, and I've been a bit of a nerd, I guess, in that way for quite a while. But I definitely didn't go with, like, right, I'm going over there to talk to the guys. I'm going to, make a doc, I want to make a doc. I just still going to go and, see what's happening, meet them, and, and take it from there with this vague little idea at the back of my mind. And, and so I turned up in El Zonte, as you said. I was traveling on my own, and hadn't really had kind of no idea what to expect. arrived at El Zonte. Someone kind of dropped me off on the road. Didn't realize that there were like three kind of entrances into El Zonte, right? Even though El Zonte is this tiny little place, there are kind of three roads that go in. And so I went down the first one, and just, you know, happened to be on the other side of the river, and there's just like nothing there, right? There's just a few huts and almost nobody around at all. And I was kind of expecting, you know, to arrive to this kind of, you know,
that happened to me too. You know, I get there, and I got there at night and it was sleepy. So I thought, okay, well, it's nighttime. And then I wake up the next day, it's like 8 a.m. or something. And I'm walking around and there's like nobody around. And I'm just like, what's going on here? Did I miss the memo or something?
Right.
You know, and then I go right down to the bottom where like the beach is, and there's a couple of shops, there's a couple of people, nobody around. And also I was thinking at the time too, like, everything would be Bitcoinized, you know, like this is Bitcoin Mecca, which of course is just my own. I shouldn't have been thinking that way, you know, but things get hype and they influence your perception. And so I went there thinking I'd just be like firing off, you know, lightning payments all over the place. It wasn't quite that way, but exactly. I feel you. It's a very small town, and I guess, you know, at certain points of the day, pretty sleepy.
Exactly. So that's how I arrived, and I was literally like, well, I don't know where to go. What, you know, this surely can't be it. And then some girl kind of appeared out of nowhere, and she was English, I think. And I was like, you know, sorry, but you know, is this El Zonte? Is this it? Is there more to it? What's going on here? You know, and she was like, oh yeah, no, there's more to it. You know, and she said, you know, it's over there somewhere. You got to kind of, you know, cross the river. And I was like, okay. And, you know, there's no bridge or anything. And so anyway, she ended up saying, look, I'll lead you. I know where there's some folks hanging out. And so, yeah, she was the one who kind of escorted me, and the tide was coming in. And so we end up kind of walking along this wall with the kind of waves crashing over the wall. And I was like, you know, what is going on? And then eventually she led me up to Garten, and like you say, I was just absolutely pouring. Well, as you know, the humidity there is pretty intense, and so yeah, you know, that was my first kind of you know, coming together with anyone in the Bitcoin world was when I came up to Gartens, and you were there with a bunch of others. You were the only one I recognized. And so yeah, I, you know, went straight up to you and said, hey John, you know, good to meet, introduced myself, and yeah, that's how we got talking.
How did you and Chimbora connect, and, you know, kind of determine? So basically what you're saying is you had this, you know, you're a Bitcoiner for a long time, you heard the news, you wanted to go and check it out, you had an inkling that, you know, it was a very interesting story, or maybe that there was a very interesting story there, and that, like, you know, maybe you could be someone to tell it, you know, very, very maybe. But how did it get to the point where, you know, after speaking with Chimbora, this became something that, you know, you decided was going to be actually a thing that you were going to pursue?
Yeah, well, so basically, as I say, I didn't go there with any real clear agenda, or, you know, or proposition or anything like that. And to be honest, you know, I'm not, you know, I'm an easy person to sort of get along with, but I'm not someone who's going to kind of go into a kind of group of people and go, hey guys, this is me, this is what I want to do, you know, like. So I was kind of playing it very, you know, low key, and maybe almost a bit too low key, because like I was just sort of hanging around a bit, you know, like like just trying to kind of gently kind of meet a few people or whatever. But so after a couple of days of just sort of hanging around Hope House and, you know, meeting a couple of people here or there and talking, I'd sort of interacted a little bit, because by that stage already there were, you know, a few folks, you know, from the Bitcoin world who had made their way there. And so, you know, already Jorge and Chimbora were starting to get, you know, people coming up to them. And so I just didn't want to be another one of their, you know, like, I could see they were kind of busy, like, you know, meeting all these kind of new people and stuff. So I didn't I just played it very kind of low key, and then I remember very clearly, like one day we were just sitting out the back of Hope House, and Chimbora was like slicing up a watermelon, and he kind of just looked over at me and he goes, "So what's going on with you then?" And he goes, "Well, what are you doing here? Why are you here? You know?"
Who the fuck
And
are you?
yeah, exactly. And I kind of felt that was coming, because I hadn't really made much, attempt to like explain who I was and why I was there or anything. And so that was the first time we really got talking. And I said to him, I said, "Look, I didn't really come here with any clear-cut, objective. I'm just an old-timer Bitcoiner, been in it many years, thought this was a very exciting thing, and really just came to explore, see what was going on." I said, if truth be told, that I have had this one little, thing that's been niggling me at the back of my mind for a long time, that one day maybe I might make a documentary film. I've never made one before, but I know a really good director, and who knows? And he just, it just resonated straight away. He's like, "Oh," he goes, "Really?" He said, "Well, funnily enough, we've been thinking about a documentary as well." And I was like, "Okay, cool." And then he explained that actually they'd been approached already by a few different people, including like quite a big network in the US. I don't remember which one. And because by this stage, I think by this stage I'd heard your first podcast with the two of them, and so I realized that there was a really interesting backstory to all of this. It wasn't just these two guys who wanted to set up a Bitcoin, local Bitcoin economy. There was years of them doing stuff in the local community, amazing things, right? Mm-hmm. Which we got into and ended up being a big part of the film. And so I was like, wow, this is a really just like amazing story, And so by the time I got talking to him, I was like, well, as I say, I did this little idea about a documentary, but I didn't come here, to really make a proposition. It's just, anyway, one thing led to another, and he made it clear that the reason they turned down the people that had approached them, well, one was some people had some kind of weird agenda. There was kind of, it was kind of woke agenda going on. They didn't want to be part of. And then another one was basically they say, "Look, yeah, we'll make a documentary out of you guys, but all the money is going to go to us, to the network, And well, they were like, "No, we're not going to do a documentary for your profit, and I said to him, right from the outset, I said, "Look, I've got no objective to make profits out of this. That's nothing to do with what, for me, it's just a magical story. From what I understand so far, it seems to be like a really amazing story that's eventually led and inspired this first government in the world to make Bitcoin legal tender. And so for me, no, I'm not interested in profit. I would back it. I would get my friend who's a director involved, or at least, that would be one option. If you guys have another director you're interested in, as it turned out, I ended up looking at two different directors. But we went with the guy I know, Joe, as you know well now.
Yeah, unfortunately, he was just total shit. But you got to work with what you got. So. That was for you, Joe.
Exactly. So yeah, so that's how it started. Like we ironed out a very kind of high level verbal agreement at that point. In the end, I said I'd take, if there are any profits, because as I learned later, really, I had no idea about independent filmmaking,
right.
And so, you know, as it turns out, it's very hard to make profits in
Not a
it.
lot of money in it.
Yeah, exactly. And
Yeah.
so, but we, you know, in the end, we said, well, if there are any profits, I'll take 10%, and that was really only with the idea that I might make a follow up. You know, it could help finance a follow up film.
Mm.
Other than that, it was you know, all the money would be donated to them and all the amazing stuff that they're doing out there. You know, and
Yeah.
well, we
But
can talk about that, but
yeah, before we get into like the approach that was taken in the doc that perhaps is different than other approaches taken, I just want to drill down on that particular point because, you know, it's been, I mean, the film hasn't been finished for 2 years, obviously, but we filmed it about 2 years ago. And I think from my perspective, correct me if I'm wrong again, but two reasons why part of the delay was around distribution. One was, you know, it's a feature length documentary, a decent amount of money went into it. And because 90% of the profits were going to be going to Hope House and the boys and their work, you wanted to, you know, give it its best chance possible to optimize that return. And that means, you know, getting it with the proper distributors and stuff like that, so you can maximize it or maximize the monetization of it, or if not maximize, but, you know, kind of give it its best leg up to do so, so that the proceeds of it could be, you know, greater and put towards the cause. And then also so that it can get greater distribution, you know, because, or more eyeballs on it rather. Now, maybe there's discussion to be had in the second case, if, you know, just throwing it up on YouTube is better. But I still think, you know, in the media landscape of the world, maybe, you know, and I think Latin America is a particular focus for this film. If you just threw it up on YouTube, you know, would it reach the same number of eyeballs as though, you know, compared to being on DirecTV and Amazon and, you know, a bunch of different streaming platforms and a bunch of different networks that are available throughout the world, so that people can, you know, there's many, many different ways for people to watch this. And that took time to get established. Is that the, you know, the
yeah.
two main reasons why it kind of, there was a bit of delay on getting it published?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like you say, I mean, first of all, it was a, you know, it turned out to be a big film, right? In the sense that it's 96 minutes long. And you know, there's the sheer number of hours of footage that we did, right, to then edit down. So the editing process was a long process itself, you know, that we were spent a month filming every day in El Salvador and another 2 weeks in the US. So there was a lot of footage to get through. So that was obviously a big part of the time process. But yeah, in terms of the decision making around how to take the film out there, put it out into the world. Yeah, I mean, you've kind of identified the two main areas. You know, one of the things that was really important to us when we started off with the film was, you know, thinking about who is the audience, right? Who are we trying to reach with this film and why? And, you know, for me, there was a big opportunity here to tell a different kind of story around Bitcoin and the people involved in Bitcoin, you know. So I think a lot of the content that gets put out around Bitcoin, and we need, you know, just to be clear, we need all kinds of content, right? So we need content that focuses on the technical side and really gets into the engineering of you know, how the Bitcoin protocol and the, you know, we need the macroeconomic side, you know, people who can really drill down into, and the historical side of, you know, how money came to be, all of these things. And, you know, and a few of those things we touch on a little bit in the film, but we also need the kind of human side, right? How does Bitcoin actually help people? How does it change lives? How does it change society? You know, and that's ultimately what we're all excited about, right? Is, you know, however good the engineering is, and however, you know, ultimately it's for the purpose of improving humanity. And so, you know, I used to work for a design company. So part of my background is in kind of product design and innovation and stuff. And this company, they had a very simple, like, kind of slogan, not a slogan, but kind of a little phrase that they used to use at the beginning of their kind of pitches and presentations. And it was design is about people, not things, right? And it always kind of resonated with me. It was like, however much you could, get excited by a great product, at the end of the day, it's how does it improve, whatever it is in the life of that person, or in the bigger community or the society or whatever. So anyway, the point being was that here was this chance, I thought, to tell a great story about how Bitcoin was changing people, but also the people that were behind, the Bitcoin Beach people that were just so, inspirational and just so impactful in their world. And so that led to then thinking, well, here's an opportunity to bring this story, I think, more to the masses, to take it beyond the kind of the Bitcoin. I don't really like saying Bitcoin community, because I think it's not really a community, but you know what I mean, the Bitcoin space. And so, I thought, because at the time as well, and I think it's becoming less so now, but at the time there was a really pretty strong negative perception, I think, from the kind of the masses towards Bitcoin, towards Bitcoiners, let's say. It was just such a misplaced perception, a misperception. And so, it was, I thought this was a good chance to take this to the masses and beyond the Bitcoin world. And so at the beginning, it wasn't the objective to find a distributor. I mean, I had Chimbora kind of squawking in my ear about, come on, let's get it on Netflix. It's on, get it on Netflix. But, I wasn't taking that too seriously, even though I was pretending to with him. But it was at the end of it was really when we got to kind of the first, edit, that I was like, okay, this is actually a really, I didn't know how well Joe was gonna, do it. And that stage was like, okay, we've got something really good here. This is like really high quality production. This is, and it felt like, it was a big decision. It's like, do we just put it up on YouTube and that's the easy thing and it's just totally accessible to everyone? But, does that somehow devalue it a little bit? It's just another, another piece of Bitcoin content that's going to go, do the rounds in the Bitcoin world, and maybe a few other people get to see it, but, and so, in the end, I thought, let's go down the distribution route, and see what happens. And so that was a big part of the long process of actually getting it finally out to market, is that we went down that and basically it's been it's been about 9 months or something since we got an offer from the distributor. So it's a long process once you get the initial offer to then actually getting it released into the market.
Right. And I don't know if this is ready to go yet, but it will also be available for watch on the Dare to Dream website, right? Like you'll be able to do a little lightning payment and then watch the film. Is that how it's going to go? And if so, when will that be functional?
Yeah, that's definitely the idea. I mean, one of the themes of the film is kind of financial inclusion, right? So a big part of it is for the people, the so-called unbanked, the majority of people in El Salvador, and probably the majority of people worldwide, still don't have access to banking services and credit cards and so on. So, that was a theme of the film, which is how Bitcoin could actually help some of these people and be participate in the digital economy. And so yeah, it was really important for me, and I had to go through a bit of a negotiation process with the distributor that we could have a separate way of offering this film out. And I mean, the distributor has exclusive rights to the US, Canada, and the Caribbean. So we can't. It will be available to watch or purchase, rent with Bitcoin Lightning through the website outside of those territories. But
do you know when?
I don't know the exact date. We're working on it now. I mean, I would like to think within the next week or so. But I'm working with a developer on it. She's, in charge of the website. And unfortunately, I mean, she did the website right from the beginning. And so we're carrying on with her, but she's now in a full-time job. So she's having to do it kind of on the side. So yeah, it's just I'm sort of dependent somewhat on her availability. But yeah, I would like to think it will be within the next week, 10 days, something like that. Right. It might even be faster. She might just one day just crack it and we can, but something along those lines.
Yeah, well, I'm excited for people to be able to get the chance to see it. And one of the reasons you alluded to, which I think makes the film unique, I mean, two basically, and both which you mentioned that I'll just drill down a bit more on. One is that the hardcore Bitcoiners know that this is not about Lambos and whatever the hell else crypto land is about, and whatever normie land thinks about crypto land and lumps Bitcoin into that, right? We know it's, as you said, about, broadly speaking, improving humanity on many metrics. Yeah. And I think a lot of the content out there, I mean, a lot of the content, to be fair, takes that angle, but maybe just not far enough. And I think the film does a good job of just not being associated with any of that kind of stuff whatsoever, and really focusing on, why is this thing so special, and what, how can it empower and enable people to, live more meaningful, more successful, more prosperous lives, and how can it empower them to basically pour gas on the good that they're already doing. And so I think it does a good job in that. But the other aspect, and this, when we first started talking about it, I think we're all like, look, we don't just want to make another Bitcoin Beach documentary or El Salvador thing. Because at the time, like, I think even Bukele remarked, like, El Salvador is the capital of Bitcoin documentaries or something. Because of course you have the law come in, everyone wants to come down and make content around it, and that's natural. But most of it was like just telling the surface level story, right? These guys in Bitcoin Beach started a circular economy. The government took notice. Maybe Bukele was somewhat of a Bitcoiner already, but in any case, he liked it. He pushed it, got the law done, and Bob's your uncle. It's the first country that has Bitcoin as legal tender, and they're off to the races. And then the Jack Mallers announcement and all that kind of stuff. And it's cool to tell that story, but I think all of us were like, that's been done, and there's nothing that doesn't really tell what's special about the story. And I think what we all thought was, there's something really special here about a bunch of guys, Chimbora, Jorge, Mike Peterson, who got together and basically out of the goodness of their own hearts wanted to do good things to help their community, to no fanfare, no benefit to themselves, just, wanted to try to make a small positive impact in their immediate surroundings in a very small town in the middle of El Salvador, a country that nobody gives a shit about. Like, can't overstate how just like, people were doing this with no expectation of any accolades, return, or anything, just want to try to help people that need help effectively. And from that seed of service and sincerity and compassion and generosity and all those things, when combined with like the inherent good, if I can use that phrase, of Bitcoin, maybe I put it this way. I think we were kind of saying that like good resonates with good, and so you had this little pocket of people doing good. And then whoever that anonymous donor was, by whatever means they came to be aware of what was happening in El Zonte, they said to the guys, I love what you're doing. here's some Bitcoin that you can do more of it with, on the condition that you don't just convert it and, to USD and spend it for your purposes, but you actually, you spend it around, you foster a circular economy. And, the guys took it seriously, and we saw it develop, and we know the rest of the story. But I think what makes their story so unique is, again, that point about Bitcoin being a force for good and being a tool for good, and their example being such a potent example of people doing, things just out of pure compassion, right? Out of pure like desire to serve others, and those two things coming together to create something really unique. And I mean, if we're right about this Bitcoin thesis, right, and that Bitcoin ultimately becomes the money of the world, and all countries either explicitly or just, implicitly kind of accept Bitcoin as money, whether they make a legal tender announcement or just deregulate and allow the market to handle it, this will have been, El Salvador's example will have been the first domino in, 200 odd dominoes to fall globally ultimately. And the fact that it, came from, or at least partially came from, because I know there's some contentions around like where, what was the real start of Bitcoin in El Salvador, but let's just say that, obviously the Bitcoin beach phenomenon was a huge part of it. To know that seed that ended up basically taking over the world ultimately was a seed of, selfless service and compassion and care for others and empathy and sympathy and all of those things. And it was Bitcoin which just enabled that to, or those two things came together to really make an impact. And that, I think, at least from my perspective, was what we wanted to convey in the documentary, rather than just doing another, surface level piece.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's exactly right. We get into that in the film, which is that, before the Bitcoin donor even ever turned up, these guys, for years were, they made a decision when they were young, when they were, there's a reason why the film's called Dare to Dream. There's a number of reasons but these guys were a couple of dreamers basically, and they wanted to change their country. They for them it started with their own community, but ultimately they wanted to change the country. And they, for them, that they resisted the temptation to do what almost all other young up and coming, Salvadorians, which was to, flee the country, go to the US, and illegally, obviously, and go over the border and look for, and they made that decision of like, no, we're if we do that, if everybody does that, the country's never going to change. And so they had that, kind of that dream, idealistic kind of mentality at a very young age of like, let's try and do something. Let's try and change our country, and let's start with our own community, our own village. And so, they were doing that. That they were obviously that was, a big part of them being able to start with that was having the mentor Michael Peterson, who's obviously a crucial part of the whole Bitcoin Beach story, and they were getting donations through churches and whatever to start helping local children. And I mean, we can get into the tragedy and travesty of what El Salvador was, before, but it was, it was a terrible situation. So yeah, what they were doing in terms of, like you say, that compassion, that love, that desire to try and change things and help people, and was all there before, the Bitcoin story even turned up. And then when the anonymous donor came along and they were able to, create this new phenomenon, which was the local economy, and their whole thesis being, around financial inclusion, we can actually get people to start becoming part of a digital economy without banking, without, and so, yeah, it was like you say, here was an amazing thing, of situation where the goodness of these people was, you know, then accompanied by the goodness of Bitcoin, and the two coming together was really what created this amazing story. And yeah, that was a big part of what we were trying to get across in the film, and I think it came across. And it's you know, going back to that whole kind of perception thing, it's just there are a lot of people out there who don't think like that at all about Bitcoin or the people involved in Bitcoin. Obviously, the kind of mainstream media and a lot of, you know, governments and politicians and, you know, just people who have influence on perception have given it a lot of, you know, bad rap. And then you've got the whole crypto thing as well, right? Which is diluted a lot of the real message behind Bitcoin. And so, yeah, that was the opportunity here, was to try and bring all of that out in a really, you know, meaningful way in the story.
Yeah, I think it's, you know, it's such a fascinating, I mean, I'm sure it'll be like a fascinating anthropological study in the future, but just the impact of, you know, honesty and truth and fairness and goodness being concentrated in a place, and how that attracts, you know, similar things to it. So let's say, you know, you kind of started with the three of the guys, you know, and then that Bitcoin donor came in and threw gasoline on it. And since then, you know, think of all the Bitcoiners that similarly value those things, like, you know, again, honesty, truth, freedom, being drawn to El Salvador, as you were, as I was, to go check it out, to go be a part of it, and then how that's impacted that community and the work they're doing, but then obviously how it's impacted the country, and all these, you know, ancillary benefits, basically, of properly, in my opinion, prioritizing those particular values and principles. When, I mean, as you said, in anyone's life, you know, there's multiple reasons why you might fail to elevate them to their proper place, but certainly in a place like El Salvador, you might have done, because, you know, just the deprivation was so extreme there that, you know, even though we might, you know, in our idealistic way of talking about these things, you know, you don't forgive anyone for, you know, not, you know, properly elevating truth or honesty or what have you. But, you know, in a day-to-day basis, when people are so deprived, I mean, it's not like you can't understand why people would just be trying to get theirs and fuck everybody else, right? Because it's like, well, I'm going to starve, or my family's going to starve, or, you know, we're going to experience some really bad thing happen to us if we don't prioritize our own gain. And to see that even in such an extreme circumstance of deprivation, that those, you know, call them divine principles, if you like, were so, regardless of the circumstance, were so elevated and prioritized, and that because they were in such a circumstance, it gave their embodiment or their application so much more gravity, like actual gravity, which pulled in other people and other you know, things that had the same thing, i.e. Bitcoin, all the Bitcoiners that followed, everything, you know, came in because of that. And I think, you know, again, I think that was really important to show in the film, because I think that's one of the more important points. You know, this is why Bitcoin has the capacity to change the world, you know, because it kind of resonates with the principles and values of truth and freedom and fairness that, you know, hopefully we all hold in our hearts, but certainly, you know, throughout the years of human civilization and theology and philosophy, et cetera, have recognized as those fundamental pillars that actually permit human flourishing and cooperation and interaction on an optimized basis. It's showing that, like once again, and perhaps we're in an era where that's been a little bit, like, those values and principles have been a little bit lost. You know, maybe that's why we see some of the chaos that's going on in the world today in various aspects of, you know, our culture. And here we have an example where it's kind of saying, like, no, it's right to basically subordinate yourself to these principles. And if you can do it despite the circumstances, the rewards will be, you know, maybe even better than you can imagine. Maybe they won't be immediate, and maybe they won't be, to your own self-gain either at all or immediately, but the net benefit will be probably more than you can imagine if you kind of hold true to them. And I think this is a great example of that having happened, a confluence of factors coming together to show the power of those values and principles when they're applied, when they're embodied, and when they're, collectively recognized and shared, let's say. And what I'm, particularly excited about is other people in similar circumstances being able to see this film and realize that, one, good things can happen if you approach things that way, not just lamenting your circumstance of deprivation, whether it is in a developed country or a developing country, and saying like, well, because of that, I'm going to forego, those values and principles that I might even recognize as being ultimately important, but I'm going to forego them just because there's so little around. I got to make sure I get mine. I think I'm hoping that film helps people think about that perhaps differently. And then I also think it's an amazing example of the smallest impact ultimately being the biggest impact in a weird way. Like many of us may think, well, the best way to get Bitcoin over the line is like, I don't know, to be a lobbyist in Washington and try to get, the US to make Bitcoin legal tender. And I feel like, one, that kind of takes you out of the immediate game of impact. And also maybe it's a fool's errand and it never really happens, or it's a waste of time or what have you. But here you have, like, could you think of a more, obviously, how I mean this. I don't mean it, pejoratively, but could you think of a more insignificant place in the world than a tiny beach town in one of the most dangerous, like, murder capital of the world countries? Like, no one would ever think that's the place where you could somehow have an outsized global impact, right? But but again, back to that point, I think if you really like pristinely embody certain principles and you act them out consistently, it starts creating like a snowball effect, or it starts generating more and more gravity. And by virtue, again, of like the circumstance it's happening in, that little, ultimately small, because these programs that these guys were, trying to do were very, very small. We're talking about groups of 5 kids, 10 kids, 20 kids, stuff like that. And so it's on a small and local scale, but just by the virtue of the way it's constituted and your approach to it, it can have such an outsized impact. And I'm hopeful that if other people in similar circumstances around the world see that example as represented in the film, just kind of see the power of that, then they may be inspired to, to think a little bit differently, or maybe to think along those same lines and dream, right? Dare to dream and think maybe, maybe something similar could happen in my life, in my community. Maybe I could, be of service or act in the same way. And what if it, it had a similar scale of impact? And I think, my last point on that is, I think that it's really important to have that humility that makes you not crave or necessarily need that, right? Like maybe, because again, the guys didn't have it for many years. So I don't think you've got to do it without the expectation of return. But hopefully the film just allows people to realize that it's possible that, wherever you are in the middle of nowhere that the world has forgotten, that it's still a powerful act to act honestly, with integrity, with truth at the forefront, in the service of good, in the service of, your family and your community members, and the positive impact that may have. I think it's, that's a big part of the message of the film. And again, I think a lot of people around the world are probably going to be receptive to that message right now, given just the state of affairs globally.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's, to your point about the scale of, like such a tiny, that really was the magic, right? Is that this tiny little village, this little community, these dreamers, trying to make change, then, you know, it ends up scaling up to being having such a big impact. And obviously, you know, you got to give credit to Bukele for his vision and his, you know, actually making it the story, you know, that it became, because by making the Bitcoin legal tender, helping to bring that law in, then it really, you know, that's what gave it the global impact, right?
Yeah.
And so, but yeah, it's amazing, and those principles that you talk about, that's exactly right. That's what's so amazing about Bitcoin and the types of people that it brings in into its world. Because I think one of the things, you know, that gets sometimes forgotten, actually, when we think about Bitcoin and we think about Bitcoin adoption, is that it's actually, you know, for most people, when you start adopting something, whether it's a new technology or you know, even if you think about some of the transformative technologies of the past, whether it's electricity or the automotive engine or steam engine or the internet, you know, they all to some degree had an immediate benefit, right? So it was very easy to adopt something like that, because you could see the immediate benefit. You know, turn on a switch and a light bulb comes on, and you were burning candles before. I mean, that's, you know, who's not going to adopt that, right? It's you know, it's in your face. And same thing with you know, an automotive, you know, engine or an automobile. You know, you suddenly you can go from A to B in a car instead of on a horse and chariot or whatever. Then you know, it's very obvious. So, but I think with Bitcoin, that's not always very obvious. You know, there is not necessarily an immediate benefit for most people, right? And we get it, you know, there's the whole low time preference and, you know, and all of that. But, you know, it is maybe in places where currencies are failing, you know, like Argentina or Venezuela, you know, maybe there is that immediate, there's a bit more of an urgent kind of need to do that. But for most people, certainly in the developed world, there isn't, you know, an immediate kind of benefit to buying and holding Bitcoin. Yeah, yes, over time it may, you know, hopefully it becomes a very good hedge against inflation, a store of value, and all these things. But going back to the point about these principles that are embodied in the spirit of Bitcoin, and why people don't just buy it and own it because, you know, it's going to hedge inflation over the next 6 months. They believe in it as something much bigger that's going to change the world in the future, right? It's a long-term vision of improving the world, changing the world, making it a fundamentally different and better and fairer place. And so I think all of those principles which you talked about, that's exactly right. And that's what we try to kind of bring out in the film. That's the point, really, is, you know, it's I think somebody said the other day, who I think it was Parker Lewis, on you know, that people will eventually, you know, the masses will adopt Bitcoin when they need to, not when they want to, right? And I think that's probably going to be the case for many people. But some of us are drawn to the bigger picture, to the principles that you talk about, truth and freedom and so on. And, you know, I think when that announcement was made, you know, in Miami with Mallers and Bukele, that's what came through in this kind of world, against this backdrop of kind of gloominess and despair, which was happening, you know, really emphasized, accentuated by COVID. Here was a message of freedom and hope and truth, and so that's what, you know, that's what we, like you say, that's what attracted us to go over there and check it out, and that snowball effect, you know, starts to happen. And the film is kind of one part of that. And there is all these other people and other, you know, so many other businesses now going over, and you know, I mean, just seeing what's going on over there. I mean, since we were there filming, it's incredible what's happened in the last 2 years. So yeah, it's, you know, it's amazing how it's played out.
Another one of the things that I think is, you know, positive or instructive about the film, you know, obviously we live in kind of crazy times, and as a result of that, or also, you know, one of the causes of that is, you know, such political polarity. You know, the point has been made so many times that when you have political money, which is what fiat is, of course, you know, the political domain rises to a stature that it otherwise wouldn't, because it becomes all consuming, all encompassing. The political apparatus is more powerful than it otherwise would be when they have, you know, the money printer to fund, you know, their gargantuan size, let's say. And one of the effects of that, as far as I can tell, and I've traveled to and lived in, you know, many so-called developing countries in my life, is that everyone gets hung up on pursuing political solutions to their perceived problems. And, you know, those perceived problems are, as I already alluded to, are particularly intense in the developing world. You know, you're talking about actual, it's not like, you know, you're in the States and it's some, you know, it's whatever, you know, victimhood thing du jour that it is, you know, that it's not really that serious. Like, you can get on with your life without addressing that particular issue. And there's many examples right now, but in the, you know, in many parts of the developing world, it's like, it's a matter of reliable fresh water. It's a matter of reliable power. It's a matter of reliable food source. Like, these are very serious issues. But part of the problem is that everyone sees solutions through the prism of political action. And, you know, unfortunately, well, one, political action is usually slow. Two, it's, you know, highly corrupt. Three, it's highly corrupting, you know, so, you know, you may have a virtuous person and say, I'm going to, you know, they're your guy, right? They think about things the same way that you do, and they get into power, and the apparatus is corrupting itself, right? And part of the reason why it's corrupting is because, you know, the money printer is a form of absolute power, right? You can print as much money as you want, and you can pay the soldiers, and you can steal the purchasing power, and you can build the buildings, you know, and of course, absolute power corrupts absolutely. And so in a lot of these places, it's just in a vicious cycle where things are bad. You pinpoint a reason you think they're bad. Some person comes along and says, you're right, and I'm going to fix that thing that you're pointing at. They become your guy. They get into power. Ends up, maybe you misdiagnosed the problem. Maybe they were more corrupt than you thought they were. Maybe the office corrupted them. Maybe there's a whole bunch of things, but the punchline is that the problem never really gets resolved. And you just get this like rinse and repeat, you know, cycle of change without any positive effect. And what I think this movie shows in a time where most people think that way is that you don't need to go the political route to resolve issues that you are, you know, you're identifying that exist. You know, so like these guys live in a very impoverished country or developing nation, but, you know, certainly when they started doing this stuff 10 years ago, much worse situation. And, you know, they didn't go to the Capitol and try to lobby the government for change or anything like that. They thought, okay, I step out of my door in the morning. What can I do to make that step, you know, those square meters around my home or my community better? Well, I noticed my neighbor, my neighbor's kids are not happy. Maybe they don't have enough food. Maybe, you know, they don't have educational opportunities. Maybe they can't afford a surfboard or something like that. Okay, well, why don't I see if I can fix one of those things? And one, that doesn't rely on anybody, doesn't rely on a politician or anything. You're not giving away power. And two, you're effectuating change immediately in your environment, right? So like whatever happens in that crazy political sphere that you can't control, you've just made your day and your life and the life of someone else in your direct environment better. And that's a win, right? That's, you know, the best win that you can expect. And what I think Bitcoin does, Bitcoin is often said is a individual revolution, right? Like you can choose to opt out anytime you want. You don't have to lobby the government. You don't have to do anything. You just choose that you are going to say no to the wealth appropriation of your purchasing power. And you have the opportunity to do that today for yourself. And the kicker is that the more people that do that, the more you actually effectively starve the Leviathan, which is causing those more systemic problems that you may have pointed out as well. And so over the course of time, the more people that do that, the more, the unjust size of the state, let's say, it atrophies, right? It fails to sustain its level of funding. It's not as easy, or they have less capability of siphoning off purchasing power. Anyways, Bitcoiners will know that story. But my simple point is that the film is non-political, even though, there's a politician in it, Bukele's in it, and he enacted a law. But I just really love how what these people did was not to go and lobby and vote harder or do whatever. They decided there's an opportunity here to do good that's totally in our control, and they did that. And then another, a tool was given to them that allowed them just to do it more, to give them more freedom, to give them more opportunity, to empower them more to do that. And again, I think in a time when things are so political, it's a tremendously powerful message to say, you don't need to wait for your guy to get in or for your team to win or any of this kind of stuff. Like most of your problems are actually, kind of have nothing to do with them really, or at a minimum, a lot of the problems you could impact or effectuate change on them like today. And if everyone did that, we'd probably fix a lot of them, and that would be better for everybody. And so, again, I think that was a point that came through in the film, and I'm kind of looking forward to seeing if other people agree with that and what kind of impact it might have.
Yeah, I think that's definitely right. I mean, I think there's two sides to that, which is, one is, like you say, is, the fact that here are some guys who just decided they wanted to make change. They wanted to do something. They took it upon themselves to try and affect change and make things happen. And, even if it was just in their local community to begin with, like you say, from kind of small acorns can, grow oak trees. And I'm sure they had absolutely no idea that, when they started off, that this would ever get to the scale it has, right? I mean, and that's the beauty of it, is like you alluded to before, there wasn't a clear end goal of like, okay, well, if we do this, eventually, hopefully we'll get Bitcoin made legal tender throughout the whole country, and then everybody will come to, want to come to El Salvador. And, they never had that, could possibly have imagined that. And so it started with just very simple, humble desires to change within their immediate environment. But, I guess, and something else, you kind of alluded to earlier, which is, when we were thinking about the audience of the film and what impact it might have on the audience. Well, I talked about, one which was kind of, trying to penetrate some of the audience that didn't, had no understanding of Bitcoin or had negative impact, negative perception, and showing them a whole different world, right? Of probably something they weren't aware of. But another part of it was like you alluded to, which was inspiring other people to do similar things to what these guys did, what the Bitcoin Beach guys did in their village. And the beauty, not because of the film, because it's only just come out, but already without the film, we're seeing all these, grassroots movements all over the world, right? Sprouting up all over the place, trying to replicate or at least do something similar, and clearly being inspired, made reference to the Bitcoin Beach phenomenon, the story, and it's already happening. And that to me is, fantastic, seeing seeing these grassroots movements. And, you know, we talked about a while ago, I think, you know, I was starting to toy with the idea of maybe doing a follow-up film in Africa, where we're seeing some you know, really interesting things, similar stories happening. But, you know, I guess, so that's one side, which is very much what you're kind of talking about. What I will say, though, is that, you know, we can't, you know, there is another very unique thing that happened here, which was that, you know, El Salvador were blessed with the opportunity to have somebody to vote for that could make a really big difference to their country.
Mm-hmm.
And that's very, very rare, right? So, you know, to your point, there's probably shouldn't be, you know, asking people around the world to, you know, to look for that same thing. Maybe Bukele himself would inspire other people to try and become a good leader, and, you know, someone who really, you know, ultimately is thinking about the people and not trying to, you know, trying to, you know, continue with the corruption and so on that everyone's so used to in almost all governments in all countries. And so here was it was a very unique situation where actually, up until now at least, it seems that Bukele is a genuinely really good guy, and so actually in this case there was a, you know, they voted him in overwhelming numbers, and, you know, up until now he's rewarded them incredibly. So you've got kind of both stories going on.
Totally. I mean, these stories always kind of hatch in, it's like, you know, the perfect storm of circumstances coming together. You know, and I agree, like, one, it's already the case, as you said, there's all these copycats, has maybe a bit of a negative connotation, but there's all these people that are realizing, like, oh, like this can happen, because before you didn't, you know, no one thought it could happen. Like they thought Bitcoin adoption was going to come by legal tender of a major country or just individuals adopting. But now, you know, all these places around the world, as you mentioned, like now they're sprouting up everywhere. These little tiny communities, mostly in developing countries, are now fostering these little micro Bitcoin economies. And I think, you know, obviously part of the reason they're doing that is because of the Bitcoin Beach example. And they're like, oh, like this can work, and this actually serves us, and this might actually get us a little bit of extra attention or funding or tourism or whatever. Like there's just a soup of goodness happening. So of course, you know, it you know, people are going to do it, and it's great that they're recognizing the benefit in it. But I agree, you know, Bitcoin, Bukele is a very unique character. And on the one hand, you know, not really to take anything from him, because this wasn't his choice, but because I was going to say, like, it takes a unique leader to give up the money printer, right? Because as we keep saying, like, that's the genesis of their power, effectively. He didn't have one when he became the leader of El Salvador. They were already dollarized, so, you know, he didn't have to overcome that, you know, temptation, right? Like he didn't have to throw the ring of power into the volcano because, you know, he didn't have it in the first place. It will be very interesting to see if or when a leader who does have the money printer throws it into the volcano and says, you know, we're getting rid of this. This is obviously a cancer on our society. And, you know, we're going to let the market figure out what money should be, but it's not going to be us. Like, you know, there's an opportunity to be a first there. And that would be a pretty baller move. But back to Bukele, I mean, he's definitely unique, and so far so good, right? I think he's doing a lot of good things, at least, you know, from our vantage point, and people on the ground seem to be incredibly happy and enthusiastic with them. And, you know, we've reflected every time we've been back, just the kind of energy that's there. You know, there's an energy and optimism, you know, and most people don't care about Bitcoin, frankly, right? Like most people on the street, but they support him. They know that it's one of his like core policies, and they have enough trust in him to say, like, yeah, you know, I still use dollars and cash and whatever, but it's cool. There's more tourists, there's more, you know, foreigners coming in. We trust them. You know, the streets are safer. There's more opportunities, all that stuff. You know, they're very they're very supportive of him. But I wonder, like, how like savvy of a leader is he? And I think I shared this with you, over one of our many conversations while we were there. What if he was the anonymous donor, right? And he really 4D chessed this out, and he, was already a Bitcoiner, and he wanted to find a sneaky way foment some, get the ball rolling in an organic sort of way. And so he, through an intermediary, somehow becomes aware of what the guys are doing in Zonte. He sprinkles a little Bitcoin on it, and it plays out all according to plan. I mean, we probably will never know, but that would be interesting. That would be a pretty smart move.
Yeah, exactly. Fair play to him. If he's the guy, then I take my hat off, and that's very, very clever way of doing it. But yeah, I think back when we were filming, as we say, it's 2 years nearly now, and 2 years ago, and back then there was still some skepticism, generally from outside the country, at least, about him. I think the likes of you and I were fairly confident that he seemed like that his heart was in the right place, and that he wanted to do the right thing. And but there were some other voices in Bitcoin world that were definitely much more skeptical, and I understand that. We've seen others leaders in other countries that have appeared to want the best for their people to begin with, and then turn into horrific, corrupt dictators. So I understand to some extent that original skepticism, but I think 2 years down the line, it's very hard now to be skeptical. I mean, it's the country's is just in such a state of transformation, and attracting the brightest, best people from everywhere, and businesses, and the optimism, and the hope, and the energy, and it's really quite incredible. And it's in the end, the Bitcoin law, it's because that's some of the criticism you get from kind of mainstream, whatever, from non-Bitcoin people say, oh well, but it hasn't really taken off. You don't have hasn't been mass adoption, and but it doesn't matter. It's like the repercussions of what he's done, of that law coming into play, has just been amazing. And it's people just can't believe it. I remember being in a taxi with this guy, talking to him, and he was just like, "Es un milagro," it's a miracle. It's like we can't believe it. And so yeah, I think that the Bitcoin law, I think eventually it will, I think they will adopt over time. I think, and the thing is, it'll be so easy for them to do it. That all the infrastructure is going to be there in place. But for now, it's just the symbolic aspect of it has been so huge and impactful that it's so exciting, really, to see a country like that, when there's so much to be negative about in this world, and so many other, you look out and you see so many problems, so much corruption, so much greed and malice and anger and war, and and here is this little kind of beacon of hope. So yeah, it really has become that. And even, I mean, Rome wasn't built in a day, right? I mean, the people that write those pieces, like, oh my God, the law came through and nobody uses Bitcoin. It's like, it's been 2 years, on the scale of things, that's nothing, especially introducing a new currency and way of transacting and way of living effectively. And so of course it's going to take some time for people to make those choices, on their own accord, and for the infrastructure to be in place for them to do so
relatively easily. But I mean, already it's probably been, I can't off the top of my head think of a country that's had a greater turnaround story ever, really. Like people often refer to the Hong Kongs and the Singapores and stuff of the world, because they were kind of like sleepy fishing villages and they became these global financial centers over the course of 50, 80 years, whatever, which is true. But like, when, think about where El Salvador was coming from, right? Like civil war, and then basically run by, a huge portion of the population was gangs, right? Like 1% or 2% of the population was gang. And they were as bad as you can think of, for gangs. It wasn't like, you live in a place where there's a big organized crime element. And if you just, if you're cool, they don't mess with you, right? Or, it's not a classy organized crime thing. Like they were, evil incarnate effectively in terms of, how much they terrorized the people, basically. So to come from that, and the economic, deprivation that comes with it and all that stuff, to just a few years later being safe, having opportunity, wealth coming in, hope on the horizon, and how powerful that can be. I mean, that was another element that we wanted to focus on in the film, which a lot of Bitcoiners will resonate with. A lot of Bitcoiners, it's like whether you are now a Salvadoran in 2015 or 16, or you were a now Bitcoiner in 2007, 2008, you probably looked out on the world, and for very different reasons perhaps, but you were like, fuck, like things do not look good, and I don't see how they're going to get turned around. And that affects you, right? Affects how you see your future, your plans for the future, what you want to do, the energy you feel on a daily basis, the bounce in your step, all that kind of stuff. Because obviously, if you think the world is going to hell in a handbasket and you don't see a way to change it, that's going to give you a different kind of energy and oomph than thinking that now, on the horizon is the most interesting, prosperous, peaceful, meaningful world that ever could have been conceived of. Forget being compared to, former generations or past eras of civilization, but, like that now the prerequisites are in place for it to be better than you could have ever imagined. Those are very different conceptual places. And to have the latter, the hopeful conceptualization now be so apparent, so bright, so tangible, that is like such a dramatic shift, such a dramatic shift in your perspective and your consciousness. And it's being played out perhaps nowhere more than in El Salvador because of, all the stuff that we've been talking about. And that's just so powerful. So again, I think like because of that circumstance, it probably is like the biggest turnaround story in history. And I think, there'll probably be many documentaries made in the future about that, which will incorporate, of course, the Bitcoin stuff. But yeah, it's just remarkable. And on happening so quickly. Again, like, as you said, maybe the Bitcoin stuff uptake, like people aren't transacting in Bitcoin as much as maybe some people expected, on day one. But as you say, there are so many other benefits of even that policy, but of course on the other policies and things that have been happening there, but that is just contributing to such an improvement of the circumstance there. And even I went the first time in July 2021, then we went in November, then we went again, was it November 22?
November 22.
Right, for the premiere, which we should touch on briefly. And like palpable, noticeable difference, even on those, those trips with, a few months and a year in between them, on the energy, on the enthusiasm, on the hope, the optimism, all that kind of stuff. So yeah. It's a remarkable story. And hopefully the film is a bit of a time capsule for where it was at a certain place in time. And one of the factors that contributed to that.
Exactly. I like to think that there's a sort of historical aspect to this, that it's that, we sense that how big it is right now, but I think, you know, it'll be history, you know, it'll be looking back in hindsight that people will really go, wow, that what an incredible moment in time that was. And so hopefully, yeah, like you say, the film is a bit of a time capsule that, you know, captures one core element of that, the kind of genesis of the Bitcoin aspect of this turnaround, right? Which is, I think, really one of the biggest aspects of, you know, of the turnaround. The other one, of course, I would say is the safety aspect, right? That, the country has gone from being the murder capital of the world to, you know, being one of the safest countries in the world, which is just, you know, it's just crazy. Yeah. And, you know, and I think it's worth touching on that because that's another area where Bukele gets a bad rap, right, from the mainstream media and in the Western world anyway. And, you know, it's just, to me, it's you know, if you're confronted with that scale of problem, and I think it's worth just, you know, mentioning that, you know, when we made the film, when we were there and we were living there day in, day out, and we were meeting all these different characters. The amount of times we heard, you know, that, oh, you know, I lost my father or my brother or my son or my best friends, or, you know, that to the gangs, right? This was, you know, everybody had a story to tell about losing friends or family to the gangs. And then aside from that is the economical side as well, right? So they were extorting money from everyone, from businesses. There was no incentive for any to be entrepreneurial in any way, right? What's the point of starting a business when most of your money is just going to get taken from you? So they just, you know, they were a huge, you know, it's hard to even think of the right word, you know, like oppressive kind of parasite of the country, and everybody living under that cloud for so many years, you know. And so when you're confronted with that kind of, you know, situation, then you know, there is no perfect way to deal with it, right? You can't, if you're just going to rely purely on the democracy and the constitution, when that's obviously been completely subjugated to these gangs, you know, which they basically own the country, then, you know, it's really you're confronted. There's a spectrum, I guess, of you know, how you deal with that. And you know, I think the way it's being dealt with isn't perfect, because there is no such thing as a perfect way, but it's probably about as good as it could be. And the end result of that now is probably 99% of the country are far better off than they were before. I mean, just, you know, light years ahead of where they were before that. So
yeah. And what the detractors often fail to include in their critique is what they would have done differently. You know, if you were facing that kind of circumstance with so many people being murdered and raped and harassed and extorted and all this stuff on a daily basis, and on the scale of the issue, as you said, I mean, how would you have done it differently? And how many more people would you have allowed to die, presuming that you would have done, you would have taken a slower, more methodical approach, let's say. And what are the trade-offs there? You know, what is the kind of moral dilemma there of, okay, we're going to go slower to make sure that fewer are caught up in the net that are innocent, that shouldn't be there. Okay, well, that just means there's going to be an extra 50 people a day, a month, whatever, that are murdered as a result of that, you know, that pace. Are you okay with that? And, you know, I do think that's an interesting conversation to have. That's the proper way to frame it. But just to say, you know, obviously the mainstream media criticisms are highly politically driven, just because maybe Bukele is on a different side of the political spectrum, and they frame it up that way, and they just criticize him for anything he does, is not productive. And it, you know, I think most people see it transparently as you know, politically motivated effectively. But yeah, it's you're right in saying that has been a huge aspect of the turnaround and the success story that El Salvador is becoming.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't even really, I mean, I guess, my background has always been a little bit of a kind of risk taker. I've traveled a lot in strange places on my own, and never been that terrified by it. I've ended up in some crazy situations because of that risk taking, I think. And probably I should have been a little bit more sensible. but going to El Salvador, I didn't actually go there the first time, because it was still, back then I didn't realize it, as I say, but when we were filming, there was still a lot of problems there, and we actually, we had a couple of moments ourselves when we, one morning we were meant to be up really. In fact, it was the morning when I think we were filming the jungle run, and we had to get up at like I don't know, some crazy hour, 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning or something, to make sure we were ready to get to the right place. And we were working with a couple of local guys who were helping us out with kind of camera work and transport and stuff. You probably remember them. Great guys, and they were living in a certain part of San Salvador, and they had to still be very, very mindful of where they traveled, what time, which routes they took at certain times of day or night. And that one morning, they didn't turn up, and we were like, where are they? And we were, because we'd had one or two times where they'd turn up a bit late. They had to get up very early to come from the capital down, and but this time they just didn't turn up, and we couldn't get hold of them. And it turned out, we found out, later on, like that night, that they'd been mugged. They'd stopped at some traffic lights, and they'd been pulled off their bikes, and because they traveled on a motorbike, and they were mugged and had everything taken off them. So it was still pretty bad, even November 21.
I think also at that time, maybe right before we went there, they had a spike in murders, because I think at the time they were trying to take actually that more like negotiation approach with the gang. I don't know much about this, but my impression was, and I think I heard something to that effect, like there was still this trying to do it a softer way sort of approach. And I think there was a big spike where like 40, 50 people were murdered in one day or something. And maybe it was some kind of retaliation by the gangs for some, policy or disagreement or something like that. There was a big spike in murders. And I think it was subsequent to that the state of exception came in. I mean, I think it seems like the attitude was like, okay, enough is enough. This isn't working. And, you've taken it too far now. We need to do something drastic about it. And, as you keep saying, it seems like that was as successful as it could have been. And the people broadly are extremely happy with how it went down.
Yeah, exactly. I think if I remember rightly, it happens either just before, just during, or just after that Bitcoin week, right, where we had La BitConf and adopting Bitcoin in the same week, and it was kind of meant to seem like it was meant to make a point, right, to try and scare all, because that was one of the biggest influxes of people El Salvador had ever had, I think, up until that point, in terms of it was literally I think they'd had like a couple of thousand people come into the country in 1 week, which I don't think they'd ever had before. And so yeah, I think it was just around that time that there was a big spike. And then, like you say, they then changed their whole policy in terms of how to deal with these people. yeah. So it was. It's amazing what's happened now. I think I think I'm right in saying it's the safest country in Latin America in terms of the murder rate now.
I've heard that too. Yeah. Um, well, one of the last things I wanted to just touch on was the premiere. We went in November of 2022. Was it? Yeah, November 2022, right?
Yeah,
That was the last time we were there. And
hanging out in
we
Denny's.
yeah, well, we'll get to that, but there was a showing of the film in the, I want to say like a anthropological museum.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
and they have a nice, probably 3, 4, 500 seat theater there. And so you and the director and a few other people got up to, say a few words, and then everyone watched the film. And there was a number of people from government, tourism, police, all that kind of stuff there. And they watched the film, and, finishes up. I mean, maybe just to be fair, maybe in such a circumstance, you always get a standing ovation because it's such a small, intimate crowd. Like, it'd be rude not to. But in speaking with people afterwards, everyone seemed to be, it's like local people seemed to be very impressed and appreciative of the film. I had some conversations with some of the government people that were there, and I think it was almost like I got the sense that it was an affirmation or a recognition of the work they were doing. Like, I spoke with one of the top security officials in the country after the film, and it seemed, he was very happy with it, and because I think it was a reflection of where the country had gotten and where it's going as a result of obviously his efforts, at least in the domain of his expertise or focus. And in speaking with other government officials, it seemed like they were very happy how it told the story of what the country was becoming, and there was definitely a sense of pride that was coming from those people. So what were your thoughts on the premiere and that whole experience?
Yeah, it was. I mean, it was great. I think it was really nice to be able to do that. And they got behind it, right? So when I say we because we'd already had a relationship with the Minister of Tourism, Morena Valdez, and also with the Minister of the Economy, although we didn't actually interview her, but we had a relationship with her office. And so there was some, we'd already had established some relationships. And so through them, we were able to find a suitable venue to do the premiere. And they helped, kind of organize that. So just that in itself was fantastic to have their support. And it was, it was really special to be able to bring up all the Bitcoin Beach guys, right, from El Zonte to the capital. So we brought up, almost the whole group. And there's obviously we've spoken about the kind of the main leaders, but there's all these young guys and girls who are doing the work and doing incredible things, and so we were able to bring all of them up to see it, and a lot of them were in it, and so and then we had a mixture. So it was a mixture of these El Zonte folks and government folks, and obviously the crew and everything. And it was great. It was really, just one of those good nights, good feeling, and like you say, we were able to they asked us to get up and do, say a few words, and they said a few words, a couple of the people on the government side. And there was a lot of a kind of mutual appreciation, I guess. And so I was super happy to be able to do that. And we had, so that they were the very first people. That was the very first screening that took place, and it was done for the Spanish speaking crowd. And then we did the following night at the Adopting Bitcoin conference. We did the English speaking version for those guys. And so yeah, it was at that point, obviously didn't realize it was going to be you know, it was going to take up until now for the film to actually come, you know, be released to the public. I didn't expect it to be so long, but that's just the way it goes. But yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, we tried to go somewhere somewhat nice for a celebratory meal afterwards, but I guess it was too late. Everything maybe closes early in San Salvador. I can't remember the reason, but we wound up
Yeah,
at Denny's, and you know, not bad, not a bad meal, really.
nice steak, which was terrific.
Yeah, right. I think I got something more likely to be good there, like chicken fingers or burger or quesadillas or something
Right.
like that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, but it was you know, just for my part, my closing comments, totally unexpected, you know, to come up, but um really, you know, it was a cool thing to be involved in. Everyone involved in it not only were, you know, were good and cool people, but everyone seemed to be just from the get-go really aligned on the vision for what they wanted it to be. Now, maybe none of us, you know, save perhaps the director, knew how to do that, you know, other than just being ourselves. But I think we, you know, there was a tremendous alignment on the vision of what was special about the story, and you know, what we'd like to try to get through on the screen. And I think, you know, everyone involved in the film was successful in making that happen. Again, you know, primarily as far as finished product, you know, you and the director Joe, in really taking all that footage and piecing it together in order to actualize that vision. But yeah, really cool thing to be a part of, and I do think it well, hopefully people like it, and it's you know, moving and meaningful to them. And I also hope that it serves as a kind of inspiration for you know, a certain demographic or subset of people that watch it, you know, that, you know, as we've been discussing, are in whatever situation and realize that, you know, acting in a certain way and using certain tools, i.e., you know, Bitcoin, and acting, you know, kind of in a more empowered way, in a more immediate way, in a more productive way than, you know, the political or the, you know, protesting stuff that we alluded to, are inspired to take that kind of action and feel that way. And, you know, you never know what can result from it. And I think the film is a pretty good representation of that. And so we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, no, exactly. Well, it was, you know, it's one of those things that it felt like, you know, sometimes just feels like the universe or God or whatever you want to call it, where things conspire to come together to make something happen, and it felt like that with the film, right?
Yeah.
I was you know, I was a big fan of your podcast before, you know, I met you in El Zonte. You know, it was one of the first things I said to you, I think. And so, and then the fact that you know, the Bitcoin Beach guys had already, you know, done something with you and said, hey, you know, we really want John to be involved as well. And I was like, perfect, you know, and it just, you know, and the fact that you were up for it and able to do it, and you know, it's like you said, there are so many times when these ideas come up, bubble up and whatever, but they never actually come to anything because, you know, there's so many reasons why they might not, you know, and someone's already busy doing something else, or, you know, and it was a you know, COVID time, and so traveling wasn't super easy at that time either, and you know, there was still you know, still fair few people wearing kind of masks and stuff. So obviously we had to deal with that a bit in the film, but yeah, no, everything just kind of came together, and then, you know, we like you say, we all seem to be on the same footing, and with the same ideas, same vision, and we all got on great, and so you know, it was actually a lot of fun as well, and so no, I'm super grateful to you for being in it, and being a key part of it, actually, you know, and obviously to everyone else who was involved. It was an amazing journey, and I'm now just super happy that we finally can put it out there. And like you say, I hope people like it. I hope it resonates. I think you know, we did invest. You know, when I started out, it's one of those things, right? And you kind of, as I say, I had this little idea that maybe I'd do a documentary one day, and then it's just like that. All of a sudden, I'd committed to doing it with these, you know, with Roman and Jorge. And I had no idea what I was letting myself in for. Right? I had no idea the scale of the project, what it was going to end up being, the amount of time that I was going to end up putting into it, and obviously the finance as well. And so it just grew into this huge thing. But I've absolutely no regrets. It's been a great.
You know, speaking of you know, the confluence of factors that just allowed it to kind of easily come together. I wonder if it wasn't, you know, because basically that was the pico top of the bull market, right? Like the kind of second wave of the bull market. Bitcoin's above 60K, and everyone's, you know, thinking it's going to go to 100 by December.
Yeah.
And so maybe, you know, as someone thinking about undertaking a project that's going to involve capital and stuff, maybe you're like, fuck it, you know, let's roll the dice, you know, everything's going well. I wonder if it was the depths of the bear, if you would have been as willing to engage in such a thing.
Absolutely. I think that's a big part of it for sure. And it's funny as well. I remember, you know, we ended up convincing, because the crew weren't Bitcoiners, right? The film crew, including Joe. And so during our journey, during our time together, me and you were like, kept squawking, like, come on, guys, you get on board. You see what it's all about. Now, come on, buy yourself some Bitcoin. And they all did. Luckily, they only dipped their toes in it up at 60K plus or whatever it was at the time. But yeah, it was definitely,
you know, it's a kind of, it's a baptism of some kind, or, you know, it's everyone needs to go through a bear to harden their hands and determine their conviction and cause all that incessant internal chatter, like, you know, why am I doing that? What is this? What should I do? Should I sell it? Like, all that stuff are just questions that need answering before you can, you know, move into the next stage of hodler. So even if they did buy the top a little bit, you know, it's part of the course. Everyone's done it.
Yeah, exactly. I'm glad they didn't sell the house and
yeah, well, I echo what you said a moment ago, Graham. It was super fun to be involved. Everyone was, you know, just awesome to hang out with and work with. Anything you wanted to say before we shut it down in terms of directing people to places? I know there's a lot of destinations on the go for stuff, whether it's the website or networks and platforms they can watch it on, or any requests that you might have for people.
Yeah, I mean, the Twitter handle is for the film is at Bitcoin Beach Doc, DOC. So obviously most of the communication we're doing through that. At some point, hopefully today, by the end of today, we'll have on the website the announcement with all the links of where it can be watched. It can be, just to, you know, say at this point, it can be seen, I think, almost anywhere from anywhere in the world now, because in the US there's a lot of different places, and then but outside the US, I think it's going to be coming live on Amazon. I'm not sure if that's happened yet. I think it might be still a couple of days away. And then when it's on Amazon, it'll be, you know, in Canada and the Caribbean, and then outside of those countries, it's on Vimeo. But all that information will be on the website. Like I say, I'm hoping by the end of today. And the website address is daretodream-film.com. So those are the kind of two places to look out for. Yeah, and then you can, I think if you put it into Google, it shows up most of the links as well. So the name of the film, the full name of the film. So yeah, that's it.
Nice. Well, I haven't watched it since the premiere. So I'm probably due for another one. I think maybe I'll get together with a few family and friends and put it on one of the platforms it's available on and give it another watch. So I'm looking forward to that. But just once again, thanks for involving me. And I think it came out really well. And I'm super pumped to see what people think about it and the impact it's going to have. So congrats on the big launch. And yeah, we'll talk again soon.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. Thanks for having me on. And yeah, I'm excited to see what people think of it. So all right.
Awesome.
Speak to you soon.
All right, brother. Take care.